What is that smell?
She pinched her nose and looked at my house like it was an open sewer.
Oh, it's you. You and that rotting pile of garbage you call a home.
Ma'am, I just moved back. If there's...
Nobody asked you to come back.
She didn't blink.
Look at you, dirt under your nails, sweat stains on your shirt. You look like a stray dog that wandered onto my street.
My family's been here since...
I don't care.
Louboutin heels, Dior sunglasses, a smile that could freeze a river.
This is my neighborhood. You're pollution. And I always clean up pollution.
You can't fight HOA. She said it. My neighbors said it. 3 lawyers said it. My pastor said it. My own daughter said it. None of them knew what was coming. Have you ever watched a woman who thought her designer heels and HOA title made her untouchable lose absolutely everything she had? Because you are about to so drop where you're watching from in the comments, hit that like, and let me take you back to where it all began. The house at 1847 Ridgemont Road wasn't much to look at. White clapboard siding, a tin roof my grandfather patched twice, a wraparound porch where the boards creaked in the same spots they'd creaked since Eisenhower was president. My grandfather William Thornton built it in 1952 with lumber he milled himself from pines on the back 4 acres. My mother Eleanor lived there for 61 years. She died on the same porch where she'd shelled butter beans every summer of her life, and the last thing she saw was the tree line she'd watched change colors 70 times. I came home after 28 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, Lieutenant Colonel retired. I'd built pontoon bridges in Kuwait, repaired levees after Katrina, supervised runway construction in Afghanistan. I could look at a foundation and tell you its load-bearing capacity in 30 seconds. But I didn't come back to inspect anything. I came back because my wife had died 3 years earlier. My daughter was grown, and that creaking porch was the only place left in the world that still felt like mine. The first 2 weeks were quiet. I replaced the rotten boards on the south side of the porch. I cleaned out my mother's kitchen, found her cast iron skillet, still seasoned a jar of peach preserves she'd canned the summer before she got sick. I replanted the lavender garden my wife had started during her last good summer. The smell of it caught me off guard one evening. Same variety, same soil, same spot, and I had to sit down on the steps and breathe for a while. Bear, my 12-year-old Labrador, pressed his head into my knee like he understood. That's when the Range Rover showed up. Pearl white Velar, custom plates HOA QN. It rolled to a stop at the edge of my gravel drive like the dirt itself was beneath it. The door opened, and out stepped a woman who looked like she'd been assembled from a magazine ad. Platinum blonde hair curled to perfection, tan that came from a booth, French-tipped gel nails, oversized Dior sunglasses pushed up like a headband. She wore a cream Chanel blazer over Lululemon leggings, red-soled Louboutin heels that sank a 1/4 inch into my Carolina clay, and she carried a Pomeranian in a Louis Vuitton pet carrier like it was a designer accessory, which to her, it probably was. "Hi there," she extended a hand with the enthusiasm of someone selling timeshares. "I'm Courtney Ashford, president of the Stonebridge Meadows Homeowners Association, and you must be the new situation." I told her my name, told her my family had owned this land since 1952, told her I wasn't a member of her HOA and never would be because our property predated her subdivision by 40 years. She lowered her sunglasses, looked at the house. Looked at me, flannel shirt, work boots, sawdust in my hair. Then she smiled. It was the kind of smile that costs $6,000 at a cosmetic dentist and carries 0 warmth. "Sweetie," she said, "this isn't your little country road anymore. This is my neighborhood. And that shack of yours, it's bringing down my property values." She turned on her Louboutin heel, climbed back into the Velar, and left a little cloud of red dust hanging in the air behind her. Tom Beckett came over that evening with 2 beers and a warning. Tom was 60, retired teacher, lived 3 houses into Stonebridge. Good man, quiet man. The kind who mows his lawn on schedule because he doesn't want trouble. "Be careful with that woman, Caleb." He handed me a bottle and sat on the porch step. "The Hendersons fought her last year, gone in 6 months. The Parkers before them 4 months. She doesn't lose. I took a sip and watched the fireflies drift across the yard my grandfather cleared with a mule and a chainsaw. Neither do I said. But sitting there that night listening to the frogs and the creak of old wood, I didn't know yet how far she was willing to go. And I didn't know that before it was over, every person I trusted would tell me to quit. The first letter arrived 6 days later. Cream-colored envelope, heavy stock, monogrammed CA in gold foil at the top. The letterhead read, Stonebridge Meadows Homeowners Association, a Courtney Ashford vision, in italic script like she was launching a fragrance line instead of running a neighborhood board. The violation my roof was visually deteriorating and inconsistent with community aesthetic standards. Fine $200 per day until corrected. I read it twice, folded it, and put it in a drawer. 3 days later, another one. Same gold monogram, same perfume ad letterhead. This time, the violation was my fence non-conforming boundary structure in conflict with approved community design. $200 per day. I didn't have a fence. I had a split-rail border my grandfather built out of locust wood in 1968 that still stood straighter than half the vinyl fences in Stonebridge. By the end of the third week, I had 11 letters. 11. My truck was a commercial vehicle stored in a residential zone. My tool shed was an unauthorized auxiliary structure. My porch light was non-compliant illumination. And my personal favorite, Beer, my arthritic 12-year-old Labrador, who could barely climb the porch steps, was classified as an unleashed aggressive animal posing a threat to community safety. Each letter carried the same watermark at the bottom. Stonebridge Meadows, a Courtney Ashford vision. Each one demanded $200 per day. The running total on the final notice was $14,600. For a man who wasn't a member of the HOA, on land that had never been part of their covenant. I sat at my kitchen table, spread all 11 letters out, and took a photograph. Then I wrote one letter back. I attached a certified copy of my grandfather's deed from 1952, a county plat showing my property boundaries outside the Stonebridge Meadows subdivision, and one sentence. This property is not subject to your covenants, conditions, or restrictions. Please direct future correspondence to someone within your jurisdiction. Sent it certified mail. Return receipt requested. Courtney's response wasn't a letter. It was a parade. The following Saturday morning, I was replacing a window pane in the upstairs bedroom when I heard heels clicking on pavement. I looked out and saw Courtney leading what I can only describe as a royal procession. 4 board members trailing behind her like attendants, all of them carrying clipboards while she walked the sidewalk in front of my property, holding a glass of rosé. At 9:30 in the morning. Gucci, the Pomeranian, trotted beside her on a rhinestone leash that probably cost more than my water heater. She stopped directly in front of my house, turned to her entourage, and spoke loudly enough for the whole street to hear. This is exactly why we need standards. She gestured toward my home with her wine glass. You let one property slide and the whole community loses its identity. This is what happens when people don't respect the vision. One of the board members, a nervous man with a clipboard, glanced at me in the window and looked away fast, like making eye contact might be contagious. I watched them move on Courtney's Louboutins, clicking a rhythm on the sidewalk, like a metronome counting down to something. A woman 2 doors into Stonebridge pulled her kids inside when the procession passed. Another neighbor closed his blinds. That evening, I went through the envelopes again. Every single one had been sent through the HOA's community mailroom. The postage was stamped from the Stonebridge Common Fund, which meant Courtney wasn't just harassing me. She was using her neighbors' dues to do it. Every homeowner in Stonebridge was paying for her personal grudge against a man who didn't even belong to her association. I filed the envelopes in a folder and wrote the date on the tab. At the hardware store the next morning, the woman at the register gave me a look I'd learned to recognize, part sympathy, part distance. I heard you're going up against the Ashfords. She scanned my box of nails without looking up. That family owns half the permits in this county. Good luck with that. She said it the way people say good luck when they mean good grief. I thanked her and walked out into the parking lot, where the Carolina sun hit the asphalt so hard the air shimmered. I loaded the nails into my truck and sat there for a minute, engine off, windows down. 3 weeks in, and I was already becoming the town cautionary tale. The man who wouldn't bend. The one everyone expected to break. When the violation letters didn't break me, Courtney shifted strategies. She went underground. The first county inspector showed up on a Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand, badge on his shirt, asking to see my septic system. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint alleging sewage runoff contaminating adjacent residential properties. He spent 40 minutes walking my yard, took soil samples, and found nothing. He told me the complaint was anonymous and shook my hand on the way out. The second inspector came Thursday, different department. This one wanted to see my well. Anonymous complaint, groundwater contamination from unlicensed agricultural runoff. I don't farm. I have 4 acres of grass, pine trees, and a lavender garden. He tested the water, ran his checklist, and left. No violation. The third inspector came the following Monday. Hazardous structural conditions visible from public roadway. She walked the perimeter, checked the foundation. I could have told her was solid in my sleep and closed the file. 3 inspections in 8 days, 3 anonymous complaints, 3 clean reports. I didn't need to be a detective to know who was behind it. But Courtney wasn't done filing paperwork. She launched a petition. I found out from Tom, who found out from his wife who'd been cornered at the mailbox. Courtney was going door to door in Stonebridge with a clipboard in one hand and a green smoothie in the other, asking every homeowner to sign a petition declaring my property a public nuisance, requiring immediate municipal action. Tom described the scene like a hostage negotiation. Courtney would ring the doorbell, tilt her head, flash that $6,000 smile, and say something like, "I'm sure you agree that we all deserve a beautiful, safe community, right? I just need your signature right here." She said it the way someone offers you a mint, pleasant, casual, completely non-optional. 73 out of 89 households signed. Not because they believed my house was dangerous, because nobody wanted to be the one who told Courtney Ashford no. In Stonebridge, disagreeing with Courtney was a hobby you didn't pick up twice. She posted the petition results on the Stonebridge Community Facebook group that same evening. A photo of my house taken from an angle that made it look worse than it was, in flat gray light probably filtered, with the caption, "How long do we let one person ruin what we've all built? Hashtag protect our values. Hashtag Stonebridge strong." 247 reactions, 89 comments. A woman named Deborah wrote, "Just condemn it already." Another said, "Someone needs to remind him this isn't 1950 anymore." 31 laugh emojis on a picture of my grandfather's house. That night I called a lawyer, Gerald Kinnear, real estate attorney in Durham. He listened for 12 minutes, then said the words I'd hear 3 more times that month. "Mr. Thornton, HOAs are tough to beat. They carry liability insurance and outside counsel on retainer. You'll spend $50,000 in legal fees and most likely lose. My advice? Sell the property, take the equity, and move somewhere quieter." I called a second firm, left a message. They never called back. The third lawyer was more direct. "I've seen what the Ashfords do to people who push back. They've got connections with the county planning office, the building department, half the contractors in Harlow County. You don't want that fight. Find someone else." 3 lawyers, 3 versions of the same answer. You can't fight HOA. I sat on the porch that night with Bear at my feet and a glass of bourbon in my hand. The crickets were loud. The air smelled like pine sap and warm clay. Across the fence line, the lights of Stonebridge twinkled like a suburb that had swallowed a farm and was still hungry. My mother lived on this property for 61 years. She never asked anyone's permission to exist here. She never needed a petition to validate her right to her own land. And now 73 strangers had signed a piece of paper saying her home was a public nuisance, and 3 lawyers had told her son to pack up and leave. Here's the thing most people don't understand about HOA jurisdiction. A homeowners association only has authority over properties bound by its covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC&Rs. If your land was never platted into the subdivision, never annexed, and never signed on to those covenants, the HOA has exactly as much legal power over you as your neighbor's book club. Which is to say, none. But knowing that and proving it in front of people who've already made up their minds are 2 very different things. The condemnation notice arrived on a Friday afternoon, hand-delivered by a man in a county polo shirt who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. His name was Deputy Building Inspector Holt, mid-40s, thinning hair, soft handshake. He stood in my front yard for exactly 11 minutes, spent 9 of those minutes on his phone, walked the perimeter without a tape measure, a level, or a moisture meter. Didn't enter the crawl space. Didn't test a single outlet. Didn't tap a single wall. Then he handed me a manila envelope and told me I had 90 days. The report inside read like fiction. Severe foundation compromise. Widespread termite infestation. Outdated electrical system posing imminent fire hazard. Structural degradation rendering the dwelling uninhabitable. I read every line standing in my kitchen, and I almost laughed. I spent 28 years with the Army Corps of Engineers. I've evaluated structures in war zones, floodplains, and hurricane debris fields. I can look at a foundation and tell you its pour date, its PSI rating, and its remaining service life before most inspectors finish parking their trucks. My grandfather poured that foundation 12 inches thick with 4,000 PSI concrete in 1952. It could hold a parking garage. There were no termites. I'd had the house treated when my mother was alive, and the last inspection report from 2019 was still in my filing cabinet. The electrical system was updated the same year. Every permit on file at the county office. Holt's report was a fabrication. Every single line of it. But a fabricated report with an official seal still carries legal weight. 90 days to bring the property into compliance, or the county could authorize demolition. I started making calls. The first was to the county building department requesting a reinspection by a different inspector. The woman on the phone hesitated, then told me Deputy Inspector Holt had been assigned to that sector and a reassignment would need to go through the department head. She'd put in the request. She didn't sound hopeful. The second call was the one that hurt. Sarah, my daughter, picked up on the third ring. I could hear hospital noise in the background. She was a physical therapist in Richmond, always busy, always worried about me since her mother died. Dad, I looked it up. Her voice was tight. People lose these cases all the time. HOAs have money. They have lawyers. They have time. You don't. Please, just sell the house and come live near me and the boys. I can't lose you too. That word too sat in my chest like a stone. She meant her mother. She meant the woman who planted lavender in the backyard and didn't live long enough to see it bloom a second time. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart, I said, but I could hear in her silence that she didn't believe me. The third call came to me. Pastor Jim Whitley from the church my mother had attended for 30 years. He'd heard about the condemnation notice. Small towns talk fast. Caleb, I know this is hard. His voice was gentle and careful, the way people talk when they've already decided you're going to lose. But sometimes the Lord asks us to let go of the things of this world. Maybe this is a sign to start fresh. I thanked him and hung up. Then I walked through the house one more time. Ran my hand along the doorframe in the hallway, the one with the pencil marks where my mother measured my height every birthday from age 4 to 17. I could still read the faint numbers. 4'1" at age 6, 5'9" at 15. The wood was smooth under my fingers, warm from the afternoon sun through the window. The house smelled like old pine and lemon cleaner, the same way it had smelled my entire life. Bear followed me room to room, his nails clicking on the hardwood. We're not going anywhere, buddy, I said. That same week, Courtney held her monthly HOA board meeting. Brenda Simmons, the board secretary, told me later what happened. Courtney walked in, wearing a new Cartier watch, projected a PowerPoint onto the community center wall, and announced, "The condemnation process is underway. By spring, that eyesore will be gone, and we can finally complete the community vision I designed." Then she clicked to the next slide. A rendered image of luxury townhomes, modern glass-fronted, 3 stories tall, sitting on a green plot shaped exactly like my 4 acres. A board member named Kevin raised his hand. "Wait, is that the Thornton property?" Courtney smiled at him the way a cat smiles at a mouse it's already caught. "Don't worry about the details, Kevin. That's my job." But Brenda worried, and 3 days later she slipped a folded copy of the board minutes into my mailbox, with a note written on a post-it. "Something's wrong here. Be careful." Brenda's note changed everything. I drove to the Harlow County Clerk's office on a Wednesday morning, walked up to the records counter and filed a Freedom of Information request for all property filings associated with Stonebridge Meadows Ashford Development Group and any parcels adjacent to 1847 Ridgemont Road. The clerk was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain. She pulled 3 folders and a binder and set them on the counter without a word. I sat at a public table near the window and started reading. It took 40 minutes to find it, but when I found it, the whole picture snapped into focus like a rifle scope locking onto a target. Ashford Development Group, registered in the state of North Carolina, principal office in Raleigh, ownership structure, Preston Ashford, 45%. 2 silent partners I didn't recognize held the rest. Preston Ashford, Courtney's husband. The man who drove a Porsche Cayenne wore Ralph Lauren polos like a uniform and had never once introduced himself to me, despite living less than a mile away. And attached to the company filing was a preliminary site plan dated 11 months earlier. Stonebridge Meadows Phase 3 Luxury Townhome Community. 24 units, private pool, fitness center, clubhouse with rooftop terrace. Estimated project value, $14.6 million. The site plan footprint covered exactly 1 parcel, mine, 4 acres at 1847 Ridgemont Road. The parcel lines were drawn in blue ink, and my grandfather's property sat inside them like a target in a bullseye. I flipped back through the dates. The site plan was filed 5 months before Courtney sent me the first violation letter, 5 months before the anonymous complaints, 5 months before the petition, the Facebook post, the county inspections, and the condemnation. Every step had been choreographed. The violations weren't about my roof or my fence or my dog. The petition wasn't about community safety. The condemnation wasn't about structural integrity. It was about clearing a 70-year-old house off a piece of land that Courtney's husband wanted to build luxury townhomes on. And Deputy Inspector Holt, the man who'd spent 11 minutes pretending to evaluate my home, I pulled his name through the county employee directory. His full name was Craig Holt, mother's maiden name, Ashford. He was Preston's first cousin. The whole thing was a machine. Courtney ran the HOA pressure campaign. Preston ran the development company. Holt signed the fraudulent condemnation. And every homeowner who signed that petition, every neighbor who closed their blinds, every lawyer who told me to quit, none of them knew they were watching a family business operation disguised as community governance. Under North Carolina law, when an HOA officer uses their position to generate financial benefit for an immediate family member, it constitutes a conflict of interest that can void every action taken under that authority. And when multiple parties coordinate to deprive someone of property through fraud and deception, it crosses into civil conspiracy territory. Civil conspiracy doesn't just allow compensatory damages, it opens the door to punitive damages. The kind of damages a jury awards when they want to send a message. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of the county clerk's office for a long time after that. The folder was on the passenger seat. The afternoon sun came through the windshield and warmed my hands on the steering wheel. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked. A lawnmower hummed. Normal sounds from a normal town that had no idea what I'd just found. For the first time in 4 months, I smiled. "There it is," I said. The next morning, I drove to Durham. Claire Dawson's office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building between a sandwich shop and a tax preparer. No mahogany desk, no leather chairs, no wall of diplomas, just a metal filing cabinet, a window overlooking a parking lot, and a woman in her mid-30s with sharp eyes and a coffee mug that said, "Due process or due consequences." She read my folder in 20 minutes, didn't interrupt, didn't take a phone call, just read. When she finished, she set the folder down, leaned back, and looked at me like she'd been waiting for this case to walk through her door. "Everyone told you to quit." I nodded. "Good." She tapped the folder. "Let them think you already gave up. That's exactly when we hit hardest." Claire Dawson specialized in property rights and HOA abuse cases. She'd taken on 3 associations in the past 5 years and won every time. Not because she was flashy, because she was thorough. She understood something most people don't. HOA boards aren't afraid of anger. They're afraid of paperwork. We built the case in layers. First, the structural report. Claire hired Dr. Alan Webb, a licensed professional engineer with 30 years of experience and a reputation that made other engineers nervous. He spent 2 full days at my property, crawled under the house with a flashlight and a moisture meter, tested every outlet, tapped every beam, took core samples from the foundation. His conclusion was 3 pages long, but the summary was 1 sentence. The structure at 1847 Ridgemont Road is sound, well-maintained, and presents no safety hazard of any kind. He then reviewed Holt's condemnation report line by line and flagged every fabrication, 12 items, all 12 false. He signed his name and stamped his seal. Second, the FOIA haul. Claire filed expanded requests, all HOA board emails for the past 24 months, all financial records, all meeting minutes, all communication between board members and county officials. North Carolina's public records laws are generous, and HOA boards that interact with county agencies fall under their scope. The county turned over 418 pages. Inside that stack we found the email, Courtney Ashford to Preston Ashford, sent from her HOA board account at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Once the house is gone, we can fast-track Phase 3. Just make sure Holt's report holds up. Claire read it aloud in her office, then set it on the desk between us. Neither of us spoke for a moment. We didn't need to. That 1 sentence connected every dot. HOA president to developer husband to county inspector to fraudulent condemnation to planned demolition, all for a $14.6 million townhouse project. Third, the cameras. I installed 6 units, 2 on the exterior walls, 1 above the front door, 1 on the back porch, 1 on the gate post, and 1 mounted on a pine tree facing the road. All of them wireless, all of them backing up to cloud storage automatically. I positioned them the way we used to position observation posts in theater, overlapping fields of view, no blind spots, backup power in case someone cut the main line. Army Corps training taught me how to set up surveillance in places where people weren't supposed to know they were being watched. My own property was considerably easier than a forward operating base. I tested each camera at night, walking the perimeter with a flashlight, while Claire watched the feeds from her laptop in the kitchen. The images were sharp, the audio was clean, every license plate, every face, every word spoken within 40 feet of my property line would be captured, time-stamped, and stored on a server in Raleigh. And fourth, the silence. This was Claire's idea, and it was brilliant. I stopped responding to Courtney's letters. I stopped contacting the county about the condemnation. I stopped talking to neighbors about the HOA. I went quiet. Completely, deliberately, strategically quiet. To the outside world, I looked like a man who had finally accepted defeat. Inside my kitchen, the camera feeds played on a laptop screen 24 hours a day. Within 2 weeks, Courtney noticed. Brenda told me later that Courtney walked into a board meeting, set her Birkin on the table and said, "Well, it looks like Mr. Thornton finally got the message. They all give up eventually. That's why I always win." She said it in front of 7 people. 6 of them nodded. 1 of them, Brenda, wrote it down. Claire and I met every Tuesday evening. She'd spread the documents on her desk, I'd bring coffee, and we'd build the case the way I used to build bridges, 1 beam at a time, every joint tested, every load calculated, no drama, no shouting, just engineering. "When do we file?" I asked her one evening. "Not yet," she said. "Let them keep moving. The more they do now, the deeper they bury themselves." She was right, and they were about to dig a lot deeper. Courtney Ashford had never lost a fight in Stonebridge Meadows, and my silence convinced her she wasn't about to start. 2 weeks after I went quiet, she called a special HOA meeting, not the regular monthly session, a special session. Invitation only, printed on cardstock with gold edging delivered by hand. She treated board meetings like gallery openings, and herself like the artist. Tom told me about it afterward. He wasn't invited, residents weren't, but Brenda gave him the details. Courtney arrived 15 minutes late, which was deliberate. She walked into the community center in new Valentino rock-stud heels, a fitted white blazer, and a silk blouse that probably cost more than the community center's electric bill. Her hair had been freshly highlighted, platinum, with honey lowlights that caught the fluorescent overhead lighting like she'd brought her own cinematographer. Gucci sat on the conference table in his Louis Vuitton carrier, panting at the board members like a furry little chairman of the board. She stood at the head of the table and didn't sit down. People like Courtney don't sit when they can tower. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, smoothing her blazer, "Caleb Thornton's property isn't just an eyesore, it's an existential threat to our community's aesthetic integrity and property values. I am calling for an emergency demolition resolution." She clicked a remote, and a projector lit up the wall behind her, a timeline. A phased plan. Bullet points in Helvetica. She'd built a pitch deck to destroy my home the same way a startup founder pitches a Series A. The vote was 5-2. 5 hands went up because Courtney wanted them up. Kevin, the same board member who'd asked about the rendering, voted no. A woman named Diane voted no. Courtney looked at both of them with the kind of smile that promised consequences. "Noted," she said to Kevin. "I'll remember that." Kevin looked at his shoes. That evening, Courtney posted an Instagram story. She stood in front of the community center's lobby wall, hair perfect, skin glowing, Cartier tank watch catching a gleam of light. Behind her, the projected slide was still visible, the words "Emergency Demolition Resolution Approved" in bold type. Her caption, "Protecting what matters. Leadership means making the hard calls. #visionary leadership. #Stonebridge strong. #Courtney Ashford style." 847 likes. Comments flooded in. "Queen! So brave! Finally, someone with standards. This is what real leadership looks like." A woman from a neighboring subdivision wrote, "Can you come run our HOA too?" Not a single person in those comments asked whether she had the legal authority to demolish a house that didn't belong to her association. Not one. Later that week, Courtney and Preston celebrated at a steakhouse in Raleigh. A corner booth with a bottle of champagne. Brenda heard about it from Preston's assistant. Courtney raised her glass and said, "One more push, babe. By spring we break ground." Preston clinked her flute and smiled. "Holt says 60 days max. The old man's already given up." They were toasting the destruction of a home that 3 generations of my family had built with their hands, over champagne that cost more than my monthly electric bill. I saw the Instagram post because Tom screenshot it and texted it to me at 9 that night. I was sitting in my garage at my grandfather's workbench. The bench was red oak, built in 1961, scarred with 50 years of saw cuts, drill holes, and pencil marks. It smelled like linseed oil and iron filings, the same smell it carried when I was 8 years old, and my grandfather let me hold the flashlight while he built birdhouses. I ran my hand across the surface. The wood was smooth in the middle where decades of arms had rested, rough at the edges where the finish had worn away. I looked at Tom's screenshot, Courtney in her Valentino heels posing in front of a resolution to demolish a home she had no legal right to touch, and said quietly, "Almost, Grandpa. Almost." The next morning, Claire called. She'd received the FOIA response, the full batch of internal emails, and she'd found more. An email from Courtney to the entire board sent 6 months before my first violation letter. Phase 3 is our biggest opportunity. P says the Thornton lot is essential. We need to make the current occupant uncomfortable enough to sell. Suggestions. A reply from a board member whose name I didn't recognize. Start with violations. Pile them up. If he doesn't move, escalate to county. Courtney's response, 30 minutes later. Perfect. I'll handle the timeline. P will handle the permits. Let's keep this off the official minutes. Off the official minutes? She'd written that in an email, on an HOA account, subject to public records requests. Claire read it to me over the phone. When she finished, she was quiet for a second. "Caleb," she said, "they're going to wish they'd never heard your name." But they still had one more move to make, and it was the one that would cost them everything. Sarah called on a Thursday evening. Her voice was thin and scared, the same voice she'd had at 5 years old when she woke up from nightmares. "Dad, I'm at the ER. They think it's my appendix. They're talking about surgery tonight." I was in my truck and on I-85 North within 12 minutes. Bear stayed with Tom. I left the porch light on and the cameras running. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. But in a neighborhood where Courtney Ashford tracked every car, every garbage can, every blade of grass, my dark windows didn't stay unnoticed for long. Tom told me later how it happened, how Courtney drove past my house the next morning and saw no truck in the driveway, how she called Preston from the Range Rover still parked on the street, engine running, how Preston called Holt, how Holt called the demolition contractor before lunch. The emergency demolition order was signed at 4:15 that afternoon. Reason? Imminent structural collapse endangering neighboring properties. A structure that had stood for 70 years, that a licensed PE had certified as perfectly sound, that had survived hurricanes, ice storms, and a tree falling on the garage in 1994. Suddenly, on the same day I left town, it became an imminent danger requiring emergency action within 12 hours. No hearing, no notice, no due process, just a signature from a cousin doing a favor for family. The bulldozer arrived at 6:07 the next morning, a Cat D6, bright yellow, rolling up my gravel drive while the mist was still rising off the grass. 4-man demolition crew. Holt stood beside his county vehicle, clipboard in hand, face blank. He didn't watch the house, he watched the road. And then Courtney arrived. Range Rover Velar, pearl white, HOA QN plates. She parked on the shoulder, stepped out in red-soled Louboutins, black Lululemon leggings, and a white cropped blazer. Hair blown out at 6 in the morning. Full makeup. Gucci under one arm, iPhone in the other hand, already recording. She opened Instagram Live. 1,200 viewers by the time the first wall came down. "Good morning, beautiful people." She waved at the camera, pivoting so the bulldozer was framed perfectly behind her. "Big day for Stonebridge, out with the old, in with the beautiful. Watch this." The D6 hit the east wall first. The clapboard siding my grandfather nailed by hand in 1952 buckled inward, then split outward in a spray of white splinters and red dust. The tin roof groaned, folded, and collapsed into the second floor like a giant stepping on a cardboard box. Glass shattered the kitchen window where my mother used to watch the birds while she made biscuits. The porch, the same porch where she shelled butter beans, where I proposed to my wife, where Bear and I sat every night, cracked at the joints and folded flat. Inside that house was my grandfather's workbench, 60 years of oak and memories crushed under steel treads in 4 seconds. Inside that house was my mother's cast-iron skillet, still seasoned from the last breakfast she ever made. Inside that house was the doorframe with the pencil marks every birthday, every inch, every year of my childhood snapped in half and buried under a ton of rubble. The lavender garden my wife planted during her last good summer went under the treads at 6:51. The smell of crushed lavender mixed with concrete dust and diesel exhaust, and it rose into the morning air like something beautiful dying. 47 minutes. That's how long it took to erase 70 years. Courtney watched the whole thing, smiling. She ended the live stream at 7:02 with a little wave and the words, "Progress looks different for everyone. Happy Friday, Stonebridge." Tom called me at 6:19. I was standing in a hospital hallway in Richmond, Sarah, still in recovery. "Caleb," his voice broke. "I'm so sorry. They're tearing it down right now. I can hear it from my kitchen window." I stood there, phone against my ear. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me. A nurse walked past, pushing a cart. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of my neighbor's grief 300 miles away, and I knew that the place where every good thing in my life had happened was becoming a pile of dirt while I stood in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic. 8 seconds of silence. Then I asked one question. "Did you get it on video?" "Every second." "Good," I said, "because they just gave me everything I need." I drove back the next afternoon, 4 hours on I-85 with nothing but road noise and the kind of silence that fills a truck cab when a man is trying to hold himself together. The house was a mound of broken wood, twisted metal, and red dirt. Dust still hung in the air like the land hadn't finished exhaling. I stepped out and stood at the edge of what used to be my front porch. My boots sank into loose soil where the foundation had been exposed, the same 12-inch concrete my grandfather poured in 1952, cracked now by a machine that didn't know what it was breaking. I found the door frame in the rubble, the one with the pencil marks. It was snapped in half, the numbers barely legible through the dirt. I picked up both pieces and put them in my truck. Neighbors stood at the edge of the property line. Some of them had signed the petition. A woman who lived 4 houses into Stonebridge was crying. Tom stood with his arms crossed, jaw set. Nobody said a word, because everyone believed the story was over. Claire filed the lawsuit 3 weeks later. Thornton v. Stonebridge Meadows Homeowners Association, Courtney Ashford, individually, Preston Ashford, individually, Ashford Development Group, LLC, and Deputy Building Inspector Craig Holt, 47 pages. Civil conspiracy, wrongful demolition, fraud, due process violations, intentional infliction of emotional distress, conversion of property. The trial started 6 months later in the Harlow County Superior Court. Courtney showed up on the first day in a charcoal gray Chanel suit, nude Louboutins, and a string of pearls that said, "I am the victim here." Her lawyer wore a $3,000 suit and carried the kind of leather briefcase that's designed to make juries feel outmatched. Claire wore a navy blazer from Nordstrom and carried a banker's box full of evidence. She built the case the way I'd taught myself to build bridges, one piece at a time, each one weight-tested before the next went on. First, the deed. My grandfather's property recorded in 1952, never annexed into any subdivision, never subject to any covenant. The HOA had 0 jurisdiction. Every violation letter, every fine, every resolution, legally meaningless from the first envelope. Second, the ownership records. Preston Ashford, 45% owner of Ashford Development Group. Site plan for Phase 3 filed 5 months before Courtney's first violation letter. The footprint drawn directly over my 4 acres. The jury saw the overlay, my property inside the blue lines like a target. Third, Dr. Webb's structural report versus Holt's condemnation. Side by side on a projector screen. Webb, sound well maintained, no hazard. Holt, severe foundation compromise, widespread termite infestation, imminent fire hazard. Claire asked the jury to consider which report was written by a 30-year licensed engineer who spent 2 days on site and which was written by the developer's cousin who spent 11 minutes on his phone. Fourth, the emails. Courtney to the board. We need to make the current occupant uncomfortable enough to sell. Courtney to Preston. Once the house is gone, we can fast-track Phase 3. Just make sure Holt's report holds up. Fifth, and this was the one that ended it, the Instagram live video. Claire played it on the courtroom screen, 1 minute and 23 seconds. Courtney Ashford in Louboutin heels and a white blazer, smiling at her phone, waving at 1,200 followers, while a bulldozer flattened a 70-year-old family home behind her. Out with the old, in with the beautiful. Happy Friday, Stonebridge. The courtroom was silent. A juror in the back row closed her eyes and shook her head. Then Claire called Courtney to the stand. She looked nothing like the woman in the video. No Louboutins, no Birkin, no Cartier. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her eyes were red. Her mascara had already started to run before Claire asked the first question. Mrs. Ashford, you broadcasted the destruction of Mr. Thornton's home to over 1,000 strangers on social media. You smiled while doing it. You called it beautiful. Is that correct? Courtney's lip trembled. I was just trying to protect the community. By bulldozing a man's home while he was at his daughter's hospital bed? The courtroom held its breath. Courtney looked at Preston. Preston looked at the table. By demolishing a house your husband's company planned to build luxury townhomes on? No answer. By using your position as HOA president to clear a path for your family's $14.6 million development project? Courtney started crying. The mascara ran in 2 dark lines down her cheeks. The $6,000 smile was gone. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 11 minutes. They came back with a number that made Courtney's lawyer drop his pen. $12 million. $3.2 million in compensatory damages, $8.8 million in punitive damages. Against the HOA, Courtney personally Preston, personally Ashford Development Group, and Craig Holt. Caleb Thornton won. Everyone who said he couldn't win 0. The verdict traveled through Harlow County faster than Courtney's Instagram stories ever had. Ashford Development Group filed for bankruptcy 31 days later. The Phase 3 project, 24 luxury townhomes, private pool, rooftop clubhouse, died on paper before a single foundation was poured. Preston Ashford surrendered his North Carolina real estate license. The man who'd worn Ralph Lauren polos like a uniform was last seen loading boxes into a U-Haul in the rain. Deputy Inspector Craig Holt was terminated and indicted on 2 counts of official misconduct and 1 count of fraud. At his arraignment, he stood in an orange jumpsuit in the same courthouse where my trial had been held. The judge told him, "Public trust is not a family favor." And Courtney Ashford, the visionary of Stonebridge, the woman who measured grass with a gold ruler and held court in Louboutin heels, was removed as HOA president by a unanimous vote. The same board that had approved her demolition resolution 5-2 now voted 7-0. Funny how courage arrives after the verdict. She was charged with fraud and conspiracy. The Range Rover Velar was repossessed, pearl white paint, HOA QN plates and all. Someone told me she was spotted driving a 2011 Honda Civic borrowed from her mother. No custom plates, no heated seats, no Gucci in the passenger seat, though she did keep the dog. Even I'll give her that. The Birkin bag sold at a judicial auction for $8,700. A woman from Charlotte posted a picture on Facebook with the caption, "Just picked up a bag formerly owned by a convicted HOA president. Vintage justice." Courtney's Instagram account went dark the day after the verdict. Before she deleted it, the last 300 comments on her visionary leadership post were all variations of the same message. "How's that visionary leadership working out, sweetie?" She never responded to any of them. The Stonebridge Community Facebook group turned into a very different place. Members posted apologies. One woman wrote, "I signed that petition because I was afraid. I should have knocked on his door instead." Kevin, the board member who'd voted no, was elected the new HOA president. His first act was to invite me as an advisory consultant on property rights. I used part of the settlement to establish the Eleanor Thornton Community Land Trust, named after my mother. The trust provides free legal consultation for families facing HOA overreach or predatory development. In its first year, it assisted 14 families. 3 of them had been targeted by other HOAs running the same playbook. I built a new house on the same foundation my grandfather poured in 1952. The concrete was still good, 12 inches thick, 4,000 psi, not a crack. The new house is modern and larger, but I kept my grandfather's proportions. It still looks like it belongs there. On the day the framers raised the first wall, Tom Beckett walked across the property line with 2 beers the same way he'd done the night this all started, and stood there, watching the wall go up. He didn't say anything. He just handed me a bottle and nodded. Sometimes that's enough. The broken doorframe, the one with the pencil marks, sits in a glass case in my living room. 4 feet 1 at age 6, 5 feet 9 at 15. The numbers are faded now, but I can still read every one of them. Sarah came down from Virginia for the housewarming with my 2 grandsons. She stood in front of the case for a long time, then hugged me and whispered, "Mom would have loved it." My oldest grandson asked what the marks were. I told him they were proof that some things are worth measuring, and some things are worth fighting for. Bear took to the new porch like he'd never left the old one. Same spot, same creaking boards, same view of the tree line my grandfather cleared 70 years ago. Everyone said I couldn't fight the HOA. My neighbor said it, my pastor said it, 3 lawyers said it, my own daughter said it. The whole town believed it. 12 jurors and $12 million said otherwise. If you're watching this and someone is telling you to give up, that the system is too big, the money is too deep, the power is too connected, I need you to hear me. They are counting on your silence. Don't give it to them.
A 31-year-old HOA president with designer heels and vanity plates decided she could bulldoze their family home that had stood since 1952. She weaponized a county inspector and cleared the path for her husband Bruce's estate. She waited until the homeowner was at his daughter's hospital bed, then sent a bulldozer and turned it into Instagram content. Everyone told him to give up. The neighbors, the lawyers, his pastor, his own daughter. He didn't. $12 million later, the woman who called herself a visionary is driving a borrowed Honda Civic And the man, she got the situation is sitting on a brand new porch built on the same foundation his grandfather poured 70 years ago. HOA have power, but that power has limit. When an official uses their position for family profit, that's conspiracy. And jurists don't forgive it. If you're dealing with HOA overreach, document everything, save every letter, record every interaction, drop your HOA story in the comment, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell. Because next week, we've got a story about an HOA president who tried to seize a virgin ranch and found out why you don't mess with a man who's been running Castor since before she was born.